Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Batman 3 Jokers number 1. So, there's a lot going on around this book, I feel, and it's for me to even know where to begin in some ways. I guess we'll start kind of with a spoiler free review, but also one that contextualizes this series a little bit because really this goes all the way back to the Dark Side War and Batman learning there was apparently three Jokers all along. And since then, that idea has been kind of teased a little bit here and there, but it's really just been leading up to this series. So there's a lot kind of to that. And with it is like a blockbuster sales numbers for this first book. Uh, that it kind of has been like a big selling point in DC in the wake of some pretty substantial layoffs across the board over at Time Warner in general. But surrounding all that baggage is just this little black label book about three Jokers, written by Jeff Johns, art by Jason Fabok, and colors by Brad Anderson. Jamcal X, Raphael, thanks for joining us. Raphael says this issue was good. So it's an interesting one. And I have to say, like, with all of that surrounding it, I really didn't let myself get too overhyped about this. I still have mixed feelings about, like, the abundance of Joker stories coming out lately. And it's a little strange publishing this around Joker War. And I feel like I'm going to conflict a little bit with some people who have already kind of said in chats as we reviewed other books coming out this week and such that they've really liked this. I enjoyed this book, but definitely have some mixed feelings and reservations. Compared to other Black Label stuff I've read, it definitely feels a lot weaker. But I didn't regret purchasing this, and I didn't hate it either. So it's a very kind of, like I said, there's a balance to it. I like certain aspects of it, other aspects I find a little weak. And I did have measured expectations, especially around Jeff Johns writing it, because this is a writer that sometimes has very interesting ideas, like with his Green Lantern stuff, though he lacks a certain depth that I would think this story would kind of need to be truly effective. And this book didn't really change that opinion, although it did have some very strong moments that I kind of have to weigh it against. While I question whether or not Jeff Johns was the right person for this particular book, Jason Fabok absolutely was. And his artwork's a big selling point, and even the design that he and Jeff Johns kind of have put together for this thing, mixed with some truly amazing coloring work by Brad Anderson, makes for a very strong comic overall. Raphael says, do you think those Jokers come from the dark multiverse or different universes? I think that this book kind of left me with that impression. It's the most natural explanation for it, although there is some other stuff kind of being floated around there and potential ideas that could make this series very interesting. And I think there is hopefully something Jeff Johns is going for in all of this that will build on this a little bit, because otherwise I'm not entirely convinced. Though that being said, this book's ending did win me over a little bit because I thought it was going to go a certain way, and it kind of went an opposite way. I'm just saying, what have you heard? It's not what I heard. It's just the context of a certain scene in this book that I'll point out, well, as we start to get into this book overall. Karsten Logan was saying, who's your favorite Joker out of the three? I think because of his visual design and the fun sort of callback, though I have other thoughts about it, which one is it? The one dressed up in the tourist shirt that shot Barbara. I got them a little mixed up because there's the clown, the comedian, and the criminal. That's the comedian. Yes. I think he's the one I like the most just because he's got a distinct visual flair, but they all kind of have their moments in this book. And the clown's quite fun, as well as the criminal, from what little we get of him. So let's kind of get into the book a little bit because it opens very strong too. Uh, Batman rams over his parents' graves because he's so injured, and the Batmobile, and he kind of stumbles into the Batcave. Raphael says, "From the way they talk, they have known about each other for a while." Yeah, well, and I think that's true, but I believe they've slipped through over the years, or I'll talk about other possibilities as we get a little farther in with spoilers. But we get the scene that has been previewed pretty heavily where Alfred is sort of patching up all these scars from Batman. We see where they come from concerning various villains, but they start to fixate on the Joker a little bit over time. And then Batman focuses on his biggest scar. Now, I've said earlier that I'm really getting sick and tired of seeing Batman's parents die. It felt appropriate here, though, because of what I was saying about the scars. And Johns kind of brings it in somewhat subtly. But it gets into, like, a certain feeling I have in this book where it's like, well, we've done a lot of this before, and I'm doing a lot of this right now in the Joker War. I really question why they decided to publish these books at the same time, but I digress. We cut to the present day, and the idea is there's three crimes that have happened, each attributed to the three different types of Jokers: the clown, the comedian, and the criminal. The comedian's sort of like more. Oh, whoops. No, the clown is sort of more of the old timey jokester kind of character that uses a lot of gag themed weaponry and gadgets and is a lot more, I guess, hell bent on having a good time, we'll say. The comedian, like I said, shot Barbara, and we also kind of focus on Barbara and Jason Todd's characters, two of Joker's bigger victims across the villain's history. And then there's the criminal who leaves these dead bodies at Ace Chemicals. So that's kind of the opening, and everyone's talking about like how this could be because there's supposedly three different Jokers at three different locations, and that's kind of the ongoing mystery. And the impression I get from this book is Batman kind of has this lingering thought from the Dark Side War of this knowledge and doesn't really know what to make of it, but his suspicions are growing in that direction, while Batgirl and Red Hood kind of are having a hard time believing it and are putting out these plausible other explanations. Really, the Joker could be anyone. It's just some dude with green hair and white skin. That's how the Joker escapes from prison all the time, and it's hard to pin down when exactly he's committing these crimes. There's some interesting thoughts being floated around in this particular part of the book. One of the guys survives and he rushes off, and Red Hood interrogates him. That leads to a confrontation with Batman and Batgirl, who are following the ambulance. And the car starts like spinning out of control. The whole situation really escalates quite quickly. Jason even physically has to stop Batman because he is so hell bent on seeking out the Joker. We then cut to a Joker who stole from Ace Chemicals and is driving off with a huge vat of, the chemical, some sort of chemical combination that'll obviously be used for Joker hijinks. And they meet up with the three Jokers. While the other, the three heroes, kind of regroup outside of the crashed ambulance, and Batman kind of insists to work together because clearly there's more than one person going on here, and whoever these people are, they're clearly working together. Then we get a little more of these Jokers talking together, and the one that we see the least of in this book is kind of talking about how he wants to try and make a better Joker. Kirsten's saying, my favorite Joker is from Death of the Family. I feel like that is the comedian. Um, so they have a little interesting thing, and they kind of decide who goes where. Our three heroes end up going to an aquarium where all these fish have been Jokerized. It leads to this big confrontation with a bunch of Joker goons and Gaggy, which is some old timey Joker minion that I don't actually know about and do not know from the comics. It must be from some era I'm unfamiliar with. But it leads to a decently fun battle where Gaggy actually gets devoured by a Jokerized shark. And one of the Jokers comes up and attacks the heroes. He ends up kind of getting pinned to and knocked out. And Batman goes off to investigate while he has Red Hood and Batgirl watch over this Joker. They kind of note how this Joker is a lot more like the older original version of the Joker. He's got like razor sharp playing cards. The whole thing with the fish is more like something he used to do. Red Hood talks about how he seems a little different, but this one's also very clearly the one that beat Jason Todd to death. And he manages to kind of goad out of Jason like this whole idea of that cycle with the Joker and Batman where the Joker goes to prison and he just breaks out. And Jason decides that he just wants to break the cycle and shoot the Joker dead. Batgirl tries to stop him and throws her batarang at it. And I honestly thought here, I will fully admit to this, in this scene, which has a lot of good pacing and build up, and Jeff Johns does a really good job at kind of setting it up, I really thought they were going in the direction of Barbara getting shot again and becoming paralyzed, because there's a lot of rumors flying around about that sort of thing. And I was like, oh wow, we're going there. But I think what actually happens is more interesting and less predictable, and ultimately was much better than where I thought they were going, and leaves me a little more hopeful about this series. Because the Joker does get hit, he falls over dead, Barbara throws a bit of a fit, but Jason correctly points out that, he just asked her, when's the last time you missed like that, Barbara? And she very clearly could have stopped him, and she kind of just runs off in tears. And Jason looks over the Joker, and in a fun little line, he's like, I hope I just killed the right one. So, overall, like I said, I quite like the opening and ending. I think there are a number of bad habits in this book, like overemphasizing Batman's immortality, pariah, self-sacrifice sort of thing, where he's just this scarred, unstoppable, super crime fighter thing. I like him more human than that, but it's not like a huge part of the book. And I do think the whole scars telling the story of Batman's history wasn't terribly done either. As an opening, it was pretty good. The whole thing with they're gonna need to fix Batman's parents' graves was pretty weighty to me and kind of set up this story pretty nicely. I really like a lot of the artwork and the use of 9 panels across this book to sort of set up scenes, flashbacks, and feelings about these characters towards the Joker. But I don't know if we needed to see Batman's origins again, and I don't really know where the substance of all this Joker business is and where it's going again. I really don't like the need of revisiting that whole stuff with Barbara Gordon and the Joker. That story and the Killing Joke just has a lot of baggage to it that I don't think Jeff Johns can fully revisit in a way that, I don't know. We'll see, because where Barbara's character goes at the end here was pretty interesting, and the fact I think it was pretty well sold that she very much could have stopped Jason but didn't, and he would have let her stop him, I'm pretty sure was the idea. Was a pretty interesting little beat of character work that I think was quite justified. And That sort of contextualizes a lot of that stuff of revisiting the Killing Joke in a more interesting way. Because now Barbara's not just the victim here, and I'm quite curious to see where things are going to go from there. Raphael is saying, if the, well, he's saying we kind of Karsten. Okay, so Karsten Logan was saying we would like here he would like to see 3 Batman. And Raphael says, well, we kind of did with the Batman Who Laughs Dark Knights. Yeah, we definitely had a lot of variations of that. But we could do something with 3 Batman very similar to this, where like an Adam West version, a more Nolanized version, and something kind of in between. I'll have to team up and do a mystery. That sounds like a pretty fun Black Label book. But again, he just needs someone other than Jeff Johns to write it. Karsten was saying, the Joker I'm scared of is the Killing Joke because that story says a lot. And I don't want to discount that story. I just think it's the same thing with The Watchmen. Like, why are we burying up that stuff or like digging up that stuff when it is kind of, those stories have come and told and said their part. And unless you have a real vision like the HBO Watchmen series, I question a lot of these comic books revisiting that sort of thing without that sort of creative force behind it. And Jeff Johns is not and has never been that. He's good for something like revitalizing Green Lantern, but this is very, very different than that. And I've never really seen this writer work in that regard. I can't think of a good example, to be honest. Rafa is saying if they leave the dead Joker, dead body there, it will jump out of a window. I'm not sure if it's really dead either or what's going on. It's crazy to kill off one of the Jokers at the start of 3 Jokers after all this build-up. But that is where I kind of am a little more interested, because that is not what I expected. And that unexpected angle, I would consider a pretty strong asset in this series' favor. Which really, yeah, like it really does work in its direction. That sort of thing, and the way it does sort of collect all these different Joker elements and Batman elements into one story does make it a cool Batman book. And now that I am kind of saying it out loud and getting to that point, I think I would recommend it. Like, it's a pretty solid addition to any Batman fans collection. Especially the print edition, because like I got this nice fancy Black Label ad-free book along with even a little playing card thing that it came with, which is weird, but okay, I'll take it. But that's a nice sort of thing, like extra bonus thing you can throw into a print edition. That gives it a little bit of more value, and I definitely approve of that. That's the sort of thing that you aren't going to get in digital. You'll probably save a little bit of money digital, but there should be some little more substance to the print copy, and it feels like there is. It's a well-printed, well-published book on the whole. That varies these days, especially in the pandemic and such. So it was good to get like a really nice polished book, and it feels like DC is quite on their game at this point post-pandemic in terms of delivering books on time and stuff. I didn't get my books on time, but DC didn't have anything to do with that. So, you know, those layoffs really didn't have a lot to do with DC Comics in particular, but with the Black Label in general, along with their young adults line doing some pretty cool stuff like Superman Slashes the Klan, Naomi I quite enjoyed. I think overall DC is still in a pretty good place. Doing more miniseries like this that are experimenting with things is the right direction. I think DC's biggest issue is actually pushing out a little bit and finding new talent. So some of the older names leaving DC Comics, in my eyes, isn't the worst thing in the world either. So what else is in chat? Raphael is saying, then again, it may have been the plan of the made Joker to have that Joker get killed for a reason. You know, in revisiting this book, I've flipped through it a few times now. I think that's kind of what they were getting at with the coin flipping scene where they were determining which Joker would go where. I think to a certain sense they knew one of them was going to die, or at the very least it's kind of that very loose planning sort of thing the Joker does, where they were just going to see if they could goad it out of Jason Todd. And I did enjoy that because the Joker dies delighted with the notion that he had this victory over Jason Todd and truly broke that man as a character. That worked for me. Like I said, that ending really sold me on a book that I have mixed feelings of, sort of, but can appreciate the value of and can definitely see why people are excited about this. I don't discount it. I do think it kind of weighs heavily against the Joker War in an interesting way. Because in some ways, I just like the Joker War more, just because it's doing some other different things too, and it's introducing a new character in the form of Punchline and Clown Hunter. So I guess two new characters, and those are fun additions to the Batman mythos in a way that I'm like the Jokers are just kind of revisiting past iterations of the Joker, and that's okay. But if you're going to line up these two books at the same time, which DC is, I definitely lean more towards Joker War at the moment. But we will see. There's more to come from both of these stories, and either like Tomasi could easily tank that Joker War storyline, or this could really go in an interesting direction, or not. So we'll have to see. Um, Jam Calax was saying, so how does Bruce hide all these scars? There's way too many for which Playboy to pass off as extreme sports and physically active vacation effectively. So the thing about that and that whole scar scene in general and stuff is that gets into where I was saying like it's a little overplayed, um, and it doesn't really work with that. I really am okay with taking that scene as sort of symbolic or something because you kind of make a good point, Jamcal, in that like I don't know how a person like how would Bruce Wayne possibly sleep with somebody? And that seems like a weird thing to say, but outside of Selena, that's gonna open up too many questions. But maybe it's gotten to that point where he just couldn't anyways, and it's more of just kind of this farce he puts on, and he doesn't really get around even outside of the whole relationship with Selena. I don't know. Karsten was saying, do you think Joker should be in Batwoman season 2? I don't know what's gonna go on with Batwoman now that what's her Ruby Rose stepped away from the role and such. I don't think they're really gonna go in that direction. They seem more inclined to stick with like Batwoman characters and her own mythology rather than relying too much on Batman characters. But I also personally haven't gotten into the Batwoman series much, so I can't speak to that really one way or the other. Uh, I haven't really felt the need to take on an additional CW series for one thing, and Batwoman definitely just hasn't caught my attention, even though I very much like that character in the comics. Raphael was saying, I would like to see if Harley Quinn finds out about the three Jokers. Yeah, she doesn't seem to be in this story, but she would be an interesting addition to that. It's curious to know which Joker she it has had a history with and who that would be at this point. I can't say for certain. It, it seems like that sort of thing would maybe be late era clown, perhaps, but it's not well defined where these Jokers start and begin anyhow. Raphael is saying, also I find it interesting that three Jokers would get along. I am assuming they've all thought about killing the others if their plan works. That's a fair assumption. I assume there's a sort of agreed sense of shared chaos or something where they probably do have a certain detente. Because the Joker is quite capable of working with others when he wants to, and then abruptly abandoning that when he wants to. It's all very fluid. I could see the three of them kind of seeing eye to eye more than any other people out there, though. And it kind of depends on where they came from. I really think it comes down to either it's some sort of multiversal hijinks, or it kind of gets into some stuff that this book was hinting on about, like, there's all this Joker gas floating around in there, all these different possible origin stories. Maybe over time, three different Jokers did crop up and grew to kind of accept one another and also relish in the chaos that, like, three of them can simultaneously create by kind of messing around with people's assumptions of them and such. I don't know. Thanks for joining us, Adrian. We are knee deep in discussing Joker stuff. And then Raphael was saying, I also find it interesting that three Jokers would get along. Wait, I said that. Kenneth Robinson was saying, I love the focus on how each Joker broke a member of the Bat family mentally. To see our heroes overcome their past trauma, that's always inspiring. I thought that was an interesting take on it too, and that's one of the book's strengths. And I mentioned it while I was going through the book, but the whole way they introduced the three Jokers through our three main characters and how they're his victims was a pretty cool take. That's a good way of framing things without kind of over idealizing the character or maybe like throwing the narrative off balance. It keeps the mystery alive too, because we really have only gotten like the slightest taste of what these three Jokers are and what they're all about so far, which is good. We have a more concrete idea of what's going on the hero side of things, and that's a good way of doing the narrative. But that might not have been an intuitive or obvious thing for every writer going into the three Jokers. So there is a lot of things, because at this point I've mentioned quite a few things Jeff Johns does, writing wise, that are very effective. They go against the grain in terms of what I expect from him as a writer, and is promising. However, I'll say a lot of that is true of Doomsday Clock at first, and I feel like that story ultimately didn't work for me, and it went nowhere. And I have a feeling that this three Joker story will kind of be a similar sort of situation. Adrian is saying, wonder if at the end of this, the three Jokers will get merged into one. I don't believe so, but I could be wrong. It kind of ties into something Tevya also says in chat, and thanks for joining us, Tevya, about whether or not this story will be in canon. I think out of all the Black Label stories so far, this is certainly the most canon relevant. I don't know for sure if it's going to be in canon anymore, because I do know that there was like these different ideas of where to take DC being floated around at one point behind the scenes at DC Comics. One was the whole rumored 5G thing, which really feels like it's not happening anymore unless I missed something out of fandom or whatever. One was Snyder's direction, which seemed to win out. And I think Three Jokers kind of took a back seat to whatever direction Snyder was going. So it probably is a little bit of a side canon thing at this point, but maybe it's a bit of an explanation of that too, and what Jeff Johns was going for with that, as he's kind of stepping away from the comic line, potentially. But I really don't know. Okay. Karsten Logan was saying, were you surprised when you found out there were three Jokers? Well, that's way back in the day of Darkseid War. And when I found out personally, no. Surprised isn't the right word. Slightly intrigued, maybe, but really no more than what I've felt already, where it's like, well, it's kind of interesting, the idea of like this character being different versions of that character as he's changed over the years, which kind of works for the Joker, and I feel has some potential still. But it's never really gotten any higher than that in terms of level of excitement. And I wouldn't say surprise, because that's like, I don't know, just an interesting superhero thing to do, but not something that ever blew my mind. I never really had much of a reaction out of that, to be honest. And that's just how I remember it going back all those years ago when I remember first hearing about it. I didn't first get it out of a book either. I heard about it after the fact, before I had read Darkseid War. Raphael says, one more thing. Oh, well, Tevya says, I would personally love for the three Jokers to be canon in the main universe. Yeah, that's fair. I think there's a lot of potential, and they should make it part of the main continuity, just to sort of allow for flexibility with the character, because why not? And it can lead to fun and weird team-ups and more open content. So I kind of do hope it's in continuity, but I'm not 100% sure that it is. We will have to see. Raphael is saying, one more thing. The Mobius chair told Batman about three Jokers. Usually in the multiverse, Batman is always Bruce Wayne, so the Joker must be the same person, because if not, the Mobius chair would have given Batman a name for the Joker. I don't see how that's. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, that's interesting. I get what you're saying because if they were all from the same world, at least two of them would have some sort of name to draw on. And the Mobius chair is just like, I think the way the Mobius chair interpreted Batman's question was just like, which one of the three? And it didn't necessarily know what their story was either, if it was never actually recorded in a way that the Mobius chair could access that information. I'm not entirely sure. I think that was just a mystery that Jeff Johns wanted to drop at one point in Darkseid War, and really he didn't think it through any more than that, or maybe beyond, like maybe he has some idea coming in this series. But I don't know if I want to give him too much credit for it being like some sort of carefully executed plan that's been in years and like that's been in the making for years, because this stuff has hardly been brought up between then and now. And I don't want to be like too much of a downer in all of this. I just think an appropriate amount of skepticism is probably healthy in this sort of story and with this level of hype. And I just don't fully embrace this the way some other people have. And that's fine. If you do, that's great. I can really appreciate certain aspects of it, and I hope I've made that clear throughout this review. Jam Cow was saying they want to build a better Joker, so the last one standing truly will be. I That was an interesting line that I didn't quite know what to make out of, because I'm not like a huge fan of the idea of let's just recreate the Joker again and just keep trying to add more and more to this character and just keep trying to do different stuff with this character. Like at a certain point, I am getting just sick of the Joker. So that I think is part of my problem with all of this. And when he's like when the one Joker was saying we need to build a better Joker, I was curious about what that meant, but it feels very repetitive against like the Joker War and that whole story being about, I guess, one of the Jokers, maybe, going on his whole crusade and also going in a new direction and also trying something new. I, I hope like you can understand in the context of that why I'm a little frustrated or something. It's tough to weigh the two stories against each other, and having so much Batman content currently devoted to the Joker is a little bit much for me, personally. Um, Tevye was saying, what was the point of the Darkseid War from the very beginning? I think the point of the Darkseid War was to have the Justice League get cool new gods powers for a little bit, and I'm okay with that. But if you think that it was some elaborate build up to something, I don't really think that was ever the case. I think it was to resolve. It was sort of, in my opinion, the closing arc of Jeff Johns' Justice League run. It sort of paid off the stuff set up with the Anti-Monitor. It did some cool things with Batman, the Flash, and a handful of other characters, like each doing their own little thing. Superman got all messed up. Lex Luthor got to take over Apocalypse, and that's about it. And then like the Joker thing was just something cool. Jeff Johns is like, oh, this will be a fun story one day. Knowing how Jeff Johns operates, I really think that was it. Given how long this took to come out and for them to follow up on this, it was really just that's all I get out of that book. Like this Three Jokers book and Darkseid War, which I hate to disappoint if you thought it was like building up to more or had some grander plan in mind. I don't believe that's the case. Darkseid, after that story, just came back in like a random Wonder Woman run, which is fine, but not clearly super canon and significant. um, Joseph Gornt, thanks for joining us, says it seems tough to have the Black Label comics be in canon when they should be unavailable and not targeted towards younger audiences. Yeah, that's where I was like, well, the Black Label's curious. I can see where a story like this can kind of bridge that gap, because young children probably shouldn't be overindulging in Joker stories anyways. And a lot of Batman comics really venture pretty heavily into maturity. That's where, like, they already published a bunch of Batman books to begin with, so making some that are more obviously designated all ages would definitely be helpful. And I say that because, like, I go to the comic book store every week, and I've definitely been there where, like, parents have had to kind of shepherd their kids towards, like, the kids section of, like, new releases away from the books they want to buy, because some of them are way too mature for the kids to get, and others are more appropriate. And it's tough for parents to know which is which. So DC kind of making these clear labels is helpful, even if canon is whatever. Kids can get over that. And the ones, if a kid's mature enough to fully appreciate that level of canon, they can get this book just fine. There isn't that much to it in terms of gore or like adult themes. Other Black Label books, yeah, I would. They're very clearly non-canon, and they're a lot more like mature and adult oriented. I definitely wouldn't recommend Harleen for any kid, for example, but it's a great book, and that's where Black Label can kind of excel, especially because comic book shops can be kind of a good filter for that sort of thing and prevent like a little kid from buying a book they're not ready to get yet. um, Heavy is saying, because the story promised from the very beginning, I blame Bendis and Dan Didio for ruining everything. Well, that's an incorrect assertion because you're talking about people that don't really have power at the company, or like Dan Didio anymore and Bendis ever. If you're talking about why it got aborted, you have to blame Scott Snyder. He was a better writer than those guys, but really won his way, and I don't even know if that was for the best. 5G, I think, had potential and probably would have involved this whole Three Jokers thing as an output a little better. First, chat just keeps on going, by the way, so I don't know how long this stream's gonna be. Karsten was saying, do you think Batman would have put one of his old costumes on because of one of these three Jokers? That's an interesting idea. I don't think so, because that... I don't know if that how that proves a victory against them, though. I expect Batman's kind of more of like this story's about him, but it's much more about the Jokers. So I don't think this is going to be a huge character piece for the Batman, and it's more of there's clearly a mystery going on here, and I like that aspect of it too, actually, which I haven't talked about yet. The mystery thing seems like a potentially cool angle to all of this. And I like how that's played up in this book because we never get enough of that in the world of Batman. Talk about how we get like perhaps too much of the Joker in Batman stuff these days, but I feel like there's not enough mystery, and that's where like the Batman movie can potentially be pretty good because it seemed pretty detective oriented to me, which I quite liked. Like based on the trailer, obviously I haven't seen the movie or anything. Bucket Think Tank, thanks for joining us. Says, I finally got to one of these, meaning the streams. I totally get being burnt out on the Joker. At least I'm more excited about this than the Joker War. Joker sort of has become low-hanging fruit for writers lately. I really understand kind of taking the side of one story over the other, and I think it really is a personal preference. I mentioned mine being for the Joker War, but I think that's just because of the new characters. So if this is your preference over the Joker War, I hardly blame you, and I'm not some uncritical defender of the Joker War, which is that. And I agree with your low-hanging fruit comment. That's a good way of putting it. That and like the Batman Origins. That's one. I talked about how it's cool that there's a whole mystery element going on with that. Here, I need to turn on this light, get us a little more light in here. But I think this book's full of that low-hanging fruit as much as it is full of cooler, unique moments in the world of Batman. So while the mystery angle's nice, the opening and the ending are strong, the whole need to go back to that Origins thing, and like I said, I understand it in this context, but I'm just like that and the stuff with the Joker, I get sick of it after a while. I get sick of us digging up old Alan Moore comics. And it weighs on me quite a bit in this review. And I knew going into this, I was going to be on a little more negative side compared to other stuff, but it's all personal preference. Adrian is saying, oh, yeah, okay. Adrian is saying, I can understand the frustration, especially when there is comic book characters that have multiple books and miniseries. It seems like they're doing the same thing. Well, that's another problem too, is it feels like there's a lot of other stories that I'd love to be getting more out of that we don't. For example, I thought Heroes in Crisis was really going to be a good setup for Harley Quinn, Batgirl, Booster Gold, and Blue Beetle being in like some sort of book together or something, and nothing really came of that. And meanwhile, we just get like story after story with Batman, Joker, and I get it. They sell books and stuff, but part of the reason for that is a lot of that other stuff is just uncreative glut, relying on the same writers over and over again. So we need new talent, pushing new ideas, new characters, and new stuff like that. Harley Quinn, for example, has gotten a lot of new energy around her because of that. Wonder Woman just had an amazing Dead Earth book because that's a character that, even though she's part of the Trinity, is relatively less explored. Superman's had a couple of cool stories come out lately outside of the main continuity uh, because they've employed new writers to tell stuff like that. Superman Smashes the Klan is a great story, and I really liked it. So I kind of agree that it's doing that. All right, I'm gonna lose some stuff. Giant DC was saying this book isn't canon. How could they do that? This is dumb. Just make it canon. Yeah, like I understand the frustration with that. Okay. So we have reached a point where I am not going to be able to read everyone's chat thing. I'm not going to keep scrolling up through it. I'm just going to read these out as best I can. So if you lose your chat, that's I apologize. I'll do my best to keep up with it. But and it's an exciting book, so I understand that. If I will do my like I said, I'll do my best. If you super chat or something like that, I'll be absolutely sure to read your comment and provide you with a special thank you or whatever. Tevi was saying 5G sounded like a mess, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, like it depends on how it's done, right? And there were some cool ideas being floated around. I like the idea of potentially revisiting stuff like Justice Society more through something like 5G and putting all of the classic DC characters in sort of a time vacuum where they can really explore those characters and have fun with them and potentially have stakes because we know there's a future where they're not necessarily around and active. And you can kind of play around with it. But, maybe it's not for the best. And if Dan Didio was the main proponent of that and he didn't get his way, it might be for the best. Let's just put it that way. Raphael says, I agree with what you said about Joker fatigue. Hopefully they lay off him for about a year or so after all this. Well, the good news of that is, for example, the next Batman movie isn't going to feature the Joker. We're going to focus on the Riddler. Again, I kind of question why we need to revisit the Riddler again when there's so many Batman villains that have never been in a movie like that and never really been heavily featured or properly explored. But certainly there's room for improvement with the Riddler. At least in his world of cinematic history. You know what I mean? Like the Jim Carrey performance was definitely going for something, but a more serious Riddler does sound interesting to me. That being said, it's like, I can think of a laundry list of other characters we've never seen in a live action movie I would really like to have seen, so but whatever. My point being that maybe we will get a bit of a break from the Joker. Maybe Joker War will kind of be it for a while concerning this character in the main continuity. And same thing with Black Label and the Three Jokers. All we need is a break. I don't hate this character. So I agree with what Raphael was saying. And Tevia, right after that in chat, says, I agree, we need a break from the Joker. Johnny DC was saying, they never make stories on Victor Zsasz nowadays. What a waste. That gets into like the kind of villain we could see more of. He was in Birds of Prey, but I feel like he was deeply underused and not like fully explored in the fun way I think he could have been. But Killer Croc, Black Mask. I was gonna say the Penguin, but that has been in a movie, but like that can kind of be revisited. Two-Face has been done enough, but then we like Mr. Freeze certainly has room for improvement. Ivy could be done properly for sure, though Ivy would definitely go against the grain of the kind of story they're telling in the Batman. or just something like Falcone or something a little more grounded could work too. But whatever works. um, where were we? So Karst was saying, what Joker do you think Batman would fight last in the story? Oh, it's definitely like the criminal who seems to be the most reserved and we've seen the least of yet. I think we're definitely building up to whatever he seems to be the most behind. And the way that one Joker was treating him in charge while the other kind of doubt, like the comedian kind of doubted it, was quite interesting to me. So I think he's definitely our big bad. And I'm not entirely sure which one he's supposed to be timeline wise. He's the real wild card in all of this. Unintended, I guess. Adrian was saying, like he's agreeing with what Raphael was saying about the Joker. He got that way. Adrian got that way when they made a lot of miniseries for Wolverine or Batman or any other character that gets their comics. And that's how I was feeling with Batman for a while, and I feel like they kind of had to pull that back a bit. They do that with some characters sometimes, and the sales will bear that out, but I think the better instinct for Marvel and DC is to build up other characters so they can also be forces in sales. Both Marvel and DC have a huge sandbox of potential choices in that regard that often go a very long time between getting their own series or mini series or storylines the way they should. Um, like it's hard for me to just start naming off like all the potential ideas that could be out there. Raphael saying Joker movies makes over $1 billion. DC's response: drop everything and make everything about the Joker. I hope they don't overcorrect in that regard. But one thing I like about the Joker movie is it really isn't got any room for a sequel, and I don't think they want to do that. So hopefully the lessons that they should take is that they need to make more movies about like villains like that and try something different. And judging by the fact that they're finally kind of going ahead with Black Adam, maybe that is the direction they're going. Because yeah, let's get a Black Adam movie. We haven't gotten that. Let's get like a Black Adam series going to kind of build up towards that. Maybe that would be great. Tevye was saying he hates Heroes in Crisis so much. Sure, but that team was rock solid. Those characters are all great, and then the right hands, Batgirl, like Harley Quinn, Booster Gold, and Blue Beetle would make an excellent little team of detectives or something like that. Uh, G. Emile Frazier says, how come Batman doesn't remember the Mobius chair? No one seems to answer this question. I assume that he does remember it, and that's why he kind of leans towards the possibility of it really being three Jokers, whereas the other characters can't believe it. I think Batman doesn't bring it up because it's a weird and fantastical story that might kind of weird out or like put off Red Hood and Batgirl a little bit, and they might not really believe it or understand what he's getting at and the significance of what he's saying. Plus, it's a long thing to explain in what's supposed to kind of be a standalone story. So I think there's a bit of a hint of that, and that's all you're going to get in terms of like any sort of follow up to the Dark Side War. And if people are expecting that out of this series or like this book, I am sorry to be the one to tell you because I kind of get the impression from some people of that in chat, but that's not gonna happen. um, But it's a good comment to make, Emil. Like it's a good point. I want to make that clear. Tevi was saying, I am depressed. Okay, I've talked about that before, Tevia. I am not repeating your points over and over again. Johnny DC was saying, can you explain the dark death metal universe, please? I'm not going to do it all here, but noted. And I think I've been kind of leaning towards making a video along those lines, so I will write that down after to do so. Because I can work with that, Johnny. No problem. Adrian was saying, is there more reason for me to fix... for... There's more reason to fix Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. Batman Forever was horrible. Yeah, so revisiting those villains in a movie, I think would be strong. But I'm not dead set against doing the Riddler either, and it's not like Jim Carrey nailed it with his performance in Batman Forever. Nope. Batman Returns? Batman Forever is the one with Riddler, so I'm right. Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy is Batman and Robin. Joseph Gorn says, I am hopeful that with the Riddler in the Batman, we'll get to see more detective and less ninja. Exactly my sentiment that I was saying earlier about that trailer. Adrian says, I heard Penguin was going to be in the new Batman movie. I believe it's Oswald Cobblepot pre Penguin, just like how it's supposed to be Selena Kyle pre Catwoman in the Batman movie. They're really kind of going for something different in that story, and I'm not dead set against it based on what I saw out of that trailer. I think there is a lot of potential on the table, and I just love Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon. That really just sold me on the whole thing. And what's his face is good as Bruce Wayne and Batman. Robert Pattinson, I think, felt pretty good in that role and looked good as Batman and Bruce Wayne. I'm all for it at this point. Johnny DC was saying we need a Zaz movie, like a proper one, as opposed to what was going on with Birds of Prey. I kind of agree. Maybe not a movie just focused on Zaz. I think that's like too Hannibal Lectery. But him being like the villain in like a Batgirl movie or something like that, or Batman would be great. But I say Batgirl because she's got a movie kind of coming out at some point in the future, and well, I guess it's confusing now with Birds of Prey, but he should have been the villain in a movie like that, which should have come out before Birds of Prey, but we don't have to revisit that right now. Karsten is saying, this might be a weird one, but do you think the Joker and Trickster would get along? I think we were. Oh, maybe. Maybe like the CW version of the Trickster, which I don't say is an insult, but that's Mark Hamill. So you pair him with a version of the Joker, and I think they would probably kind of understand each other to a certain degree. They would connect on a level that maybe neither would fully understand as characters, but we would understand. That's a pretty good one, Karsten. Took me a second to get what you're saying, but it's pretty funny. Slacker High is saying Three Jokers is the DC Old Guard swan song. AT&T has shifted the focus to YA and Scholastic books. I doubt 300,000 plus sales is enough to have them change their mind. So, okay, there's a lot you're saying there. I agree that this is a bit of a swan song to the previous era of DC. I think that's a good thing. I think the shift towards YA and Scholastic books is where the book market is, and this is a huge lucrative market for DC that there was a time people at the company of DC weren't even aware of. Well, it was like blockbuster sales from Guts and stuff like that. And that is borderline like criminal in terms of incompetence on the part of the DC execs that have been missing that market for like decades now. Because Scholastic was the thing when I was a kid. That being said, I don't think this is the end of all ages or adult oriented comics from DC or what they're going to put out in shops. I mentioned how like they put a little card here. Like there's clearly a market and a way to work with the direct market and those sorts of comics, but you do need to kind of broaden your horizons and offer people more. These black label books are very accessible and easy reads, easy gifts for adults who like these characters and that sort of thing. And there's a huge market for it. You talk about the sales for Three Jokers. I don't really think that even compares to the sales that the Harleen hardcover and trade have like been floating around in terms of numbers. Those were huge. So there is still definitely a future for Black Label, even with Andy Curry kind of, well, not kind of, having been laid off, unfortunately. He proved the success of that before he had left already. And like I said, it wasn't so much about the comics themselves, the layoffs, more so the broader business decisions with AT&T regarding satellite dishes way back when. So people have overreacted to a degree to the layoffs at DC in terms of what they mean. Them wanting to get more into YA and Scholastic is a little less fun for people like us, but really you can do both, and that's how you get people into reading these books more, growing that market, and ultimately leading to more books for us. So I am 1000% for it, because it also further justifies like the existence of these books anyways. But like even under the worst case scenarios where people are floating around rumors of DC not publishing books like this anymore, I think under that circumstance, that just means a company like Dark Horse or IDW gets licensed DC books and they publish their own. And to be honest, that sounds pretty damn cool. So uh, I really am not worried about that in terms of like the future of stories that, you know, long term, older, nerdier fans like us, there will always be a place for us too. But they, like Marvel and DC, can sell so much more than they do by tapping into this market. Because the numbers that other YA publishers get out of Scholastic are insane and put even something like Three Jokers to shame. And that's where that like 300,000 sales number does have a limit because that isn't that huge in the world of books compared to other stuff in the larger market. It's pretty good for a comic, like especially a single issue, but it's not earth shattering either. Uh, Emil Fraser is saying, with Criminal Joker being super old, what does that mean about the age of Batman? I don't know if he's super old. I think he just harkens from the earlier era of the kind of shifting timeline of Batman, and I think that not being overly specified is the best way to do it because that's kind of borrowing from Marvel a little bit, where it's all sort of, yeah, when did this story happen? Oh, a few years ago. When did story X happen? Oh, a few years ago. The one in the Joker, they say he's relatively older because he sort of harkens back to the day. I really think it's just sort of a comment on the relative career of Batman without this guy being crazy old. But with the weird nature of Black Label's continuity, it does seem like he's pretty far along in his career. Like, those are a lot of scars on his chest, more than what we usually see. So it is possible. Plus, Alfred's here, so clearly it's not that in canon. Like, I just realized that. um, okay. Jam Calax was saying Batman versus Hugo Strange and the Monster Men. Oh yeah, Hugo Strange would be a great one for what's it called? Like a movie or something like that. That was one I was thinking of when I was talking about the villains, but I neglected to bring up his name. He'd be good. Scarecrow. He's really only kind of been a secondary villain across the Nolan movies, and I think there's a lot that can be done with him too. Um, Tebby asked like a bunch of questions about the DCEU, but how do I feel about the Snyder Cut? I feel I've made my thoughts clear, but it's not gonna fix a broken movie, and the images we've gotten out of Darkseid so far look like a joke. The whole thing, just I think it's. I don't know. I will say that every director's cut and altered edition of the DCEU movies from that era, like their early period, are better than the theatrical releases. So it is possible the Snyder Cut will be better, but it won't be worth the like amount of time and fight people put into it. And I really truly believe that the worst parts of the Justice League movie are the Zack Snyder parts. So I am not excited for that movie. Um, Tevye is saying just a comment to what I was talking about the Batgirl movie. You haven't heard anything about Batgirl for years. Yeah, but that's how those things go. Same thing with Black Adam, and that finally looks like the ball is rolling. Really, just is a matter of when it kind of gets out of development hell from DC, and it makes sense for them to only really focus on a couple of movies at a time. And they've also been delayed because of the global pandemic. Johnny DC is saying Birds of Prey is awful and doesn't need to exist. While Tevye is saying Birds of Prey I thought was fun. I did a whole video on my thoughts of Birds of Prey. I think it came close to greatness, but was lacking in a few key components, and ultimately just wasn't enough of what I love about the Birds of Prey comic book team. Which is a shame because I really like Margot Robbie and her take on Harley Quinn and her attitude surrounding that character and being an actress in like these series of comic book movies. She has this amazing attitude for it, and I really feel like Birds of Prey as a movie kind of let her down. um, Rafa was saying based on what Amelia's comment was, or Amelia's comment was about, like the Joker being old, that would mean that the Joker was around before Batman, meaning that he does not belong in that universe. Well, that's an interesting interpretation of it. I didn't really read it that way, but that would definitely lean heavily towards these Jokers being from alternate dimensions in that particular theory. Okay. So we've been going for a full hour, and unfortunately, I am running out of time. I actually have to work, believe it or not, but not work the way you might traditionally think of it. I have an overnight shift, but I'll be sleeping through most of it as I am paid to. It's complicated, so I don't have a terribly stressful shift ahead of me, but I do have to go to work soon, so I will try and go through as many comments as I can in the next little bit, but I do probably have to call it quits soon and probably won't get through everyone's chat, but I really appreciate everyone being active and talking shop with DC and a pretty substantial book in terms of DC history, because it was something introduced in Darkseid War, and I don't want to downplay that too much, but I did want to contextualize a little bit, like why Darkseid War is not going to come up in this book, I don't think, because it should stand alone a little bit, and why it might not even really fully be relevant in all of this. And hopefully that's not too much of a disappointment to anyone. Okay, Adrian is saying, I agree with reaching different markets. I think one of Nintendo's flaws was not reaching for older fans and just making games for kids. Well, and one strength of the Nintendo Switch, which amusingly is always just the way it's configured with my TV and stuff, it's always just kind of sitting in the background here, along with a few amiibos. But I think one strength to the Switch's favor is that it has a lot more adult-oriented games. So I have like Death by Daylight on there and a bunch of other stuff, in addition to more all ages games. Compared to the Wii U or even like the Wii and GameCube, there's a much bigger variety in terms of content out there, even if Nintendo themselves more focuses on younger oriented games. So I think they definitely did a step in the right direction with the Switch and making it more accessible to third-party stuff and letting the third party fill in that adult-oriented thing. The downside is I only have so many games on the Switch because I can also get them on the PS4 and Steam, and because I tend to play more adult-oriented games, being a grown-ass adult, I really just and they don't have adult-oriented exclusives like Sony. There is a difference there, but your point is definitely valid about the need to reach different markets, and that being true for DC, especially because there's so much money in it, like with Scholastic readers and stuff like that. That's really where you can get a lifetime comic book reader from. It's going to be very hard to get adult peers to start reading books like that, but most comic book readers I know started as kids, myself included. Okay. I'm just kind of skimming through chat now. We don't need to necessarily talk about New Mutants yet, but I think it's going to be trash. I hear it's like the worst X-Men movie yet, which is not a good sign. And then Raphael, Emil, Frazier, and Tevia are all just saying some nice logging off terms and stuff. Thanks, guys, very much again for participating and all that. Okay, Tevia has one last theory, though. Speaking of three Jokers, I have a theory that two of the Jokers are imposters, and the criminal is the true mastermind. It is possible that they're not like true Jokers in the sense that they were somehow created over time. And we did talk about that at some point throughout this stream. But, yeah. Is New Mutants even out fully yet? I haven't heard the full details or really paid that much attention to it. I did recently go shopping, and I still have to watch the new Bill and Ted movie, which I hear is pretty damn good. And I'm pretty excited about that. So maybe I'll let you guys know how that goes, although I don't have time for that now because I gotta go get ready for stuff. Tevia's saying he thinks New Mutants is out fully in theaters. Oh, well, maybe I'll have to go check it out because it's getting to the point where I feel reasonably safe about going to a theater around here these days, I guess. But I had mostly been focused on watching the Bill and Ted movie next. I will look into that New Mutants business and see what's going on in my area. So thanks for watching, guys. I can't believe New Mutants finally came out. That's funny. I know critics have seen it recently, so it has to be out in some form. But yeah. Anyways, thanks again, guys. You have a good one, and we'll be back later this week with new comics and other videos I have planned.